Welcome to the book of 2 Peter, a book that is all about the second coming. Woohoo! I love it. Like his first letter, Peter wrote this second letter from Rome shortly before he was martyred, and probably very shortly. Take a look at this. Down in verse 14 of chapter 1, he says, "Since I know that the putting off of my body or my departure will be soon." Peter's about to die. He knows it. And the only hint that we're given as to the audience of this letter, who he's writing to, well, we're not going to get it from this opening line. We have to go down to chapter 3, where Peter says that this is now the second letter I am writing to you. Well, what do you think the first letter is? It has to be, of course, 1 Peter, and therefore, this second letter is written to the same broad audience as 1 Peter, those residing in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. Well, it appears as if there was a specific brand of false teaching which was taking root in these areas, and Peter wrote this letter to confront that false teaching and those false teachers. Well, how does this letter then describe those false teachers, those bad guys? We'll take a look at this. Let's look at how 2 Peter describes these false teachers. Well, they came up from within their own community, within the church. They didn't come from outside, because it says that false teachers are among you and that they even feast with you. They participate in communion, it seems. However, they're deceiving people within the church. This is not good. They secretly are bringing in destructive heresies, deceptions. They're enticing unsteady souls. And unfortunately, it appears as if many are following them. This is not good. And no surprise, they are teaching for money. Look at this. In their greed, they will exploit you with false words. Their hearts are trained in greed. Well, that's nothing new for these false teachers. All right, so what about their teaching? What is the nature of their false teaching? Well, fortunately, we have their own words, or at least a paraphrase of their teaching in the beginning of chapter 3. Look at what Peter says that they say. Let's jump over to chapter 3 of 2 Peter. 2 Peter 3. In the last days, scoffers are going to come and they will say, or they will ask, where is the promise of his coming? Now, we're talking about the second coming. They see no reason that Jesus is going to come back again. For ever since the fathers fell asleep, they said, all things are continuing as they were from the beginning of creation. It is as if these guys they're like weathermen, and they're looking outside up at the clouds. They're like, have you seen God do anything lately? No. And I don't see any reason why that's going to change. Well, Peter then devotes the whole body of his letter to responding to 3 different objections that these false teachers raise against the second coming of Jesus. And let's take a look at them backwards here. We'll start where we just read in chapter 3, where they say, you know what, Jesus, he's not coming back. And if he's not coming back, well, that means there's going to be no final judgment. And if there's no judgment, well, then everything that the apostles have been teaching, they just made it all up. It's a cleverly devised myth. Well, Paul is going to make a critical observation about this kind of thinking. He says that there is a tight link between one's doctrinal purity and one's moral purity. You want to know whether you can trust these guys' teaching? Look at their lives. And these false teachers who deny the second coming of Jesus, their lives are a picture of shameless debauchery. And Peter's going to address that in chapter 2. And that is why he begins his letter. He begins his letter with a call to holiness here in the first half of chapter 1. And this call is rooted in God's grace, his double grace, actually. It begins with a double gift. His divine power has granted us all things that pertain to life and godliness. Through our union with Christ and the indwelling of the Spirit, we are fully equipped to live in the present like God himself, to be godly, knowing that one day we will be fully conformed to his image. And that is his second gift. Let's take a look at that one. This is amazing. In chapter 1. So 2 gifts, right? A double gift. Gift 1, gift 2. He's granted to us his very precious and great promises that through them you may become, look at this, partakers of the divine nature. Whoa, that's quite the statement. Now, of course, it's not saying that we're going to become gods. That's heresy. Let's nix that off the table. What it is talking about is that us being fully conformed to the moral character of God. But there's also an element of glorification in there too. We are called to his own glory and excellence. I mean, this is amazing. Well, next, Peter's going to proceed to tell us just what this kind of person looks like. And he says that you are to make every effort to supplement your faith with these 7 Christ-like virtues. Supplement your faith with virtue. Virtue with knowledge. Knowledge with self-control, steadfastness, godliness, brotherly affection, and to cap it all off, of course, love. Having said that, having listed these things, Peter is ready to start his attack on the false teachers. And he says, now, if you practice these things, you will be fruitful and you will never fall. But these false teachers, of course, well, they've already fallen and their lives are characterized by bad fruit. Remember what Jesus said, you will know them by their fruit. And then Peter's going to say, if you lack these things, and this is super interesting, look what he says. If you lack these things, this is in chapter 1, verse 9. Here's all of these qualities or these things. Whoever lacks these things is so nearsighted that he is blind, having forgotten that he was cleansed from his former sins. Nearsighted and forgetful. But isn't that interesting? Those who are nearsighted, they cannot see things that are far ahead of them, like the final judgment. But those who are forgetful, they cannot remember things that are far behind them, like the price that was paid for Jesus to cleanse us from our former sins. In other words, these false teachers, in the words of Jesus, they are blind guides. Now, we're going to see how Peter, like a trained optometrist, will correct their vision in our next lecture.